Hello, 6th grade, and welcome to your first lesson of your 6th grade year. Today, we're going to talk about the Greek influence on Western thought. Now, the reason we're going to go into this Greek influence is that our first block this year is a look at the history of Rome. But we can't fully understand the history of Rome unless we recognize how deeply the Romans were influenced by the Greeks. The Romans, as we will see in our studies this year, deeply influenced what we would call Western thought, or a way of thinking that came out of Europe. Now, eventually, this Western European way of thinking would spread around the world through colonialism and other ways. But its first influence is something that we're going to learn about in the next lesson after this. Now, this Greek influence is something that we see in so many parts of our world, in particular in the areas of education and mathematics and science, that it's important for us to have a basic understanding of who the Greeks were and how they thought. We're going to start off with the Greek alphabet. Our own alphabet was deeply influenced by many of the Greek letters, and a huge number of our words that we still use today in the English language come directly from our study of Greece. So what was the Greek alphabet? Well, when we look over here to this side of the board, we can see all of the Greek letters and their names. Alpha, beta, gamma, delta, epsilon, zeta, eta, theta, iota, kappa, lambda, mu, nu, xi, omicron, pi, rho, sigma, tau, upsilon, phi, chi, psi, and omega. Now, many of those letters you would recognize as letters that we use in English, and some of those letters look unfamiliar. But as we go through our studies, in particular of math, we're going to see that the Greek letters can be not only just a letter, but can also have an idea captured in mathematics. For example, the Greek letter delta is something that represents a triangle. Now, a delta has a few meanings for us in modern day English. One is where a river meets the sea. When it meets the sea, rivers oftentimes spread out into a triangular shape as they go in and they change from freshwater to saltwater. Delta in mathematics is a symbol for change. When one thing will change to a next, we might use the letter delta. Even more important to us will be the Greek letter pi. Pi is a letter that the Greeks used to define a number that can be used in calculating things about mathematics, in particular the circle. You see, the circle is the most complicated of our shapes for us to measure. We really can't get accurate measurements of any shape or of any circle without using this very special number, 3.14159, and on and on and on. It's a number that is infinite. The Greeks found through calculations and a lot of long thinking about how to use this number to understand the circle and its role in geometry, which of course is also a Greek word. Geo in Greek means earth. Metri means the measurement. And so when we measure the earth, which we will certainly be doing as we start geometry immediately this year, we can thank the Greeks for being able to give us a number that helps us to find out anything to do with the circle. Now, the Greeks also gave us something that we're going to call philosophy. In the Greek language, philo means to love, and sophia means knowledge or wisdom. And so the Greeks had a sense that it was important to love knowledge and love wisdom. They spent a great deal of time thinking, and not just thinking, but thinking about thinking. And so this is also something that we will learn from the Greeks this year. We will think about our thoughts. Where do they come from? Why are we thinking these things? What is the next thought in our train? And so we'll look back to these very important people in ancient Greece who gave us these early stages of philosophy. Now, the first of these great thinkers was a man named Socrates. And Socrates lived in the city of Athens from 470 until 399 BC. Now, Socrates gave us his famous quote, "The unexamined life is not worth living." Now, unexamined means something you haven't thought about. If we examine something, we look at it, we analyze it, we think about it. If we don't analyze our life and think about it at all, well, people can do that. But Socrates would think that that was not worth doing. He gave us then something called the Socratic method. And the Socratic method means you learn by asking questions. Well, what a great thing to begin our year with. It's very important that you, as students, learn how to ask good questions. You will learn so much by thinking about things, asking questions, and then thinking about the answers to the questions that you've had, and then asking more questions. You see, Socrates was an old man by the time that he became incredibly influential. He was a veteran of the Peloponnesian Wars, and he was known as this rather unusual-looking man who wandered around and asked questions and gave answers. He gathered around him a huge number of young men who were amazed at the way he was able to ask questions and think about the world. And in time, all of his questioning brought him a whole school of people who followed his way of thinking. Now, eventually, he became so influential that some of the leaders of Athens found him dangerous. Asking too many questions can get you into trouble in certain societies. And so, Socrates' life was ended when he drank hemlock forced upon him and was forced to kill himself. But before Socrates died, he had left an important legacy of thinking. Now, one of his most famous students, in fact, the one who actually wrote about Socrates, because Socrates never wrote his things down, was a man named Plato. Plato came from 427 until 347 BC. Now, Plato took many of the ideas and ways of thinking that Socrates brought to him, and he expanded, and instead of just being someone who wandered around with a group of young men asking and answering questions, Plato created a school. Plato's school was called the Academy. And today, any school that has Academy in its name, for example, Hawaii Preparatory Academy, if a school has that in its name, then they trace themselves all the way back to the early days of Plato. Now, above Plato's Academy, it was said that he had written, "Let none enter who is not versed in geometry." He found geometry so important because it truly gives us an understanding of the world around us, measurement of shapes, an understanding of space, and a sense of how things fit together are crucial in understanding how the world works. In Plato's Academy, geometry was valued. He also brought us something called dialogue. Plato loved to explore ideas by using dialogue, in which people would have a conversation with one another and share their ideas. One side could express one thing, the other side could express something else, and in the dialogue, we learn from one another. So here is a second thing that I will ask you to do this year as students. You will not only be asking questions, but we will be having a dialogue with one another in which we explore answers to the questions that are asked. And we look back and forth and we think about things, because that was the next thing that Plato wanted to bring. Reason. Reason is a rational way of thinking about things. It is not based on what you're feeling in the moment. It is based on thinking about things reasonably, using facts, following a train of thought, and finally coming up with ideas that are not just based in the feeling or the whim of the moment, but have really been well placed and well thought out. Plato gave us the word Platonic relationship, in which people can have a relationship with one another that is not romantic. It is simply one that we appreciate one another and we like to have dialogue. Plato also gave us the Platonic solids, and this is a series of shapes that you will meet in the 8th grade, and we'll explain why they're so important. Now, Plato, in his academy, had a very famous student, and his student, who followed this theory and developed it further, was a man named Aristotle. He lived from 384 to 322 BC. Now, if you're feeling confused about the numbering of the years in which these men lived, you can remember that at BC, when we go back in time, the numbers get larger, because the further you get away from the year 0, the older it is. The closer to 0, like 322, is of course closer to our modern era. Now in Anno Domini, AD, which the Romans and the Latin language gave us, that is every year after 0 coming up to the modern year of 2020. Aristotle, back in his era of the 300s BC, brought us something called methods of inquiry. And once again, inquiry is a word that we use for asking questions. We inquire about something if we want to know about it. And he not only said, should we ask questions, we should come up with a really good way to ask questions, and we should record the answers to what we're asking. And so he took education and thinking even further. He became such a great thinker and teacher that eventually a very powerful leader who had developed a strong kingdom in Macedonia, a man named Philip, contacted Aristotle and said, I want you to teach my son. My son will inherit the empire that I have made, and I want him to be a good ruler. And so Aristotle was invited to come up and create the Elysium. And the Elysium was a school that he founded in order to first teach the son of Philip of Macedonia, and also to teach all those who would come far and wide who wanted to learn on a higher level. And so this higher thinking is something that we still look for today. In fact, in our universities in the United States, we actually see these Greek letters showing up once again. There are gatherings of people, male and female, fraternities and sororities that occur at universities where people gather together. They all name themselves after a group of Greek letters. Phi, Kappa, Alpha, Pi, Beta, Phi, Sigma, Chi. These are all different fraternities, and they go back all the way to ancient Greece to give themselves names. Now, Aristotle's very famous student is this person that we are going to meet next in our studies, because he is someone who spread this Greek influence all the way from Macedonia, his homeland, to India. And this person's name was Alexander the Great. Now, going back to Aristotle and his Lyceum, he went so far as to create a whole series of studies that we will now see that people still use today when we go into education. And in fact, many of these are going to directly influence what we learn this year. First of all, physics. Physics is a study of how things work. Movement, expansion, contraction, how things exist in the world. We'll be learning this year about the physics of light, heat, sound, electricity, and magnetism. Biology is a word that refers to a study of life. Logi has to do with logic or an understanding. Bio refers to life, and so biology is where we study life, whether it's plants, animals, or anything else that is living. Zoology takes that study more specifically, and we can quickly see the root of the word zoo in this as we study animals. Metaphysics would be how things work on a higher level than we can understand. Quite often, metaphysics can go into things like spirits and ghosts, all kinds of things that are beyond our understanding in the rational world around us. Logic, a way of thinking about things with a clear pathway so that we can get from point A to point B in our thinking and it makes sense. Aesthetics is a way of looking at how are things beautiful in the world, what is pleasing. Poetry, how do we create beautiful words? Theater, how do we enjoy performing things, exploring ideas in a creative way? Music, that needs no explanation. Rhetoric is a way of speaking about things in public clearly. If you are a teacher or you're a politician, you have to master the art of rhetoric. Psychology, obviously a field where we study how we think, what is going on inside the human mind. Linguistics, something that we will see quite often this year as we look at different words and we ask, where did they come from? How is language made? Well, like I said before, the Greeks gave us a lot of influence on our current language, including all the words that we're using now. Economics, we will revisit this when we study business math this year. Economics refers to studying how things are traded. It's a study of money. Finally, we won't be able to avoid talking about politics because it's the year 2020, and we will be thinking about the elections happening in the United States that will influence our government. So the Greeks gave us so many different things that still influence our world today. In fact, we still have a word that we use when we think about the Greeks and then later the Romans who were directly influenced by them, and we call that the classical age. So I look forward to sharing with you the story of Alexander and how he took this Greek thought and spread it throughout a whole region, creating Alexander the Great's empire.